Okay, welcome guys. So what I'm going to do is talk about the January 2018 paper for Unit 2 Health and Social Care. A few people have asked if I could do a few more of these walkthrough videos, and I think I've done a lot of the recent papers. So what I wanted to do was look at one of the earlier papers, just because there are a few questions that are slightly different in its format, some interesting questions that come up in generally, and just so we can see some different paper varieties. Now, as I say, this is one of the earliest papers for the Health and Social Care Unit 2 exam. There are a few bits of it that don't quite match up with what we've seen in more recent papers, but it's always good to see a few different things in these exams. So this is the January 2018 paper, and we'll go through it question by question as we always would. But what we will do at each point, if we get a chance, is we'll jump to the mark scheme just to confirm what the examiners would like to see. So our first question comes in section A. As always, scenario 1, ill health. And in this case, we've got Bill, who has dementia. He lives in a care home. Bill has a care worker who's Rasheen, and they work together quite nicely. Bill will sit for long periods of time, quite quietly, but he has outbursts of anger. And it also mentions Bill's losing weight. He has diabetes alongside his dementia. He's on a special diet, and they're managing his diabetes. He doesn't have much family living in the country, and Rasheen is taking on the role of advocate. So there's a lot of detail in this content. So first question, pretty standard 2-marker that we're used to with this exam, which is identify 2 other health and social care professionals who could work with Bill. Now, in the case study, it mentions Rasheen, who is his care assistant. So we can't have a care assistant because that one's already taken. And what we also know is that Bill is living in a care home, a residential care home. So he's not going to be having domiciliary carers or anyone coming into his home to care for him, because he doesn't live in his own home. So what we can have, we'll kind of go with our standard professionals who we could include here. So GP is always a good one. We could have a district nurse would come out to visit. We might have a dementia or diabetes, or a admiral, so someone who works with dementia. Nurse, because again, one of the things we want to kind of emphasize is that exam papers do like you to be specific on the type of nurse. We might have a dietitian. It could be a physio. You might even see, social worker. Support workers. It could be a healthcare assistant. Also, he's going to be living in a care home, so professional. We could have care manager or care home manager. Again, who would interact with him? So you're quite spoilt for choice a lot of the time with these questions. There are a lot of people who can fit into this answer. And if we take a look at the mark scheme, as I said we would, we can see here, I'm going to zoom in a tiny bit because obviously we're going to reveal some of the answers to later questions. So there we go. Doctor, nurse, social worker, big old range of professionals who could assist Bill. As you mentioned, care assistant, they're not going to allow because it is in the case study scenario. Domiciliary carer wouldn't allow because he doesn't live in his own home, he's in a care home. Looking at the mark scheme, the one thing is it just says nurse. They've quite generally allowed nurse here, but again, keep in mind this was the first exam paper ever in the series of Unit 2 papers, so probably more flexibility here. Recent exam papers have seen much more need for a specific type of nurse. Nurse they consider to be too general, so that's why they would like a district nurse, a diabetes nurse, a mental health nurse. So try to be a bit more specific with these questions. The same with like hospital. They don't like just saying hospital because it's too vague. They like you to kind of specify a particular ward, a unit, a place in that hospital. Okay, so that's a good start to this question. Again, it's a 2-marker, it's 2 minutes. I know I've spent slightly longer on it to talk it through, and you only need to put 2 people, 1 mark per professional. Now, section B, or question 1B. This talks about Rasheen as the role of Bill's advocate. So it did mention in the case study, she's acting as his advocate because he has communication challenges. And it says, describe 2 other day-to-day routines Rasheen could have in her work with Bill. So it's a 4-marker. We're identifying 2 things. And as I always kind of say to my class, if they want 2 things, but it's worth 4 marks, they clearly want you to explain a little bit of those 2 things or expand on them ever so slightly to gain the 2nd mark. So if we kind of just bullet point list what Rasheen probably does in her day-to-day role with helping Bill. So there will be personal care being provided. That's washing, dressing, feeding. Rasheen is going to help organise and attend medical appointments. Again, another goal, another role of Rasheen is to be helping him attend and organise his medical health checks. She might support him in taking his medication and recording when he has taken it. Again, dementia is going to make it difficult for him to remember to take his medication. So we've got personal care, we've got organising appointments, we've got supporting him in his taking of medication. She may help with routine tasks such as shopping or leisure activities. So again, this might be part of Rasheen's role. Again, we only really need 2 of these and we can expand on them. But let's take a look at what the mark scheme had to say. Now, I think when I looked at this mark scheme with my class, I did this in class with my students today. One of the things that came up in the mark scheme was a few kind of the odd kind of suggestions. So one of the things it says off the bat is, do not accept reference to being an advocate. Because the question told you Rasheen was his advocate, the case study told you that. So that's fine. If someone put advocate, I would understand to not accept it. One of the things here, though, I do find odd is this part here, encouraging Bill to communicate so he will participate in activities in a home. So I mean, and I understand it is slightly different because it is about helping or encouraging Bill to communicate, but I did feel that's kind of quite close to the role of an advocate, is to support him in communicating with others. But we can let that one go. Again, other things that she's doing, offering Bill choice. We didn't have that one, but that's a good idea. Checking his needs are met. Again, personally, saying his needs are met and monitor the needs. Bit vague for me, but again, this was an early paper. They would kind of allow these answers. They're a little bit more, I would imagine, a bit more sort of specific in what they want now. Provide physical personal care. We've got that one here. And provide leisure activities and safe support. So we've kind of combined shopping and leisure together, and helping him to liaise with other health professionals. We've kind of got that with making appointments and his family. Again, 1 mark for identifying the support, 1 mark for expanding on it to explain how or why that is of use to Bill. Again, I've not gone into that in too much detail in my plan, but just to give you the context of some ideas of what you could talk about. Again, you don't have to match the mark scheme. One of the big things I love about the Unit 2 paper, why personally it's one of my favourite papers, is the phrase at the very bottom of the paper, which I just want to highlight here: accept any other valid response. That's my favourite phrase in the whole of these exam papers, because it gives you a lot more flexibility, but it also recognises that you can come up with some very good ideas that are not on the mark scheme, And as long as what you're saying is realistic, it's applicable to the case study, you've explained what you mean, then I feel you could be awarded marks. That again, a student in my class this afternoon, when we looked at this paper, when we looked at this question, talked about assisting Bill using technology and sort of talked about how, you know, a lot of things like banking and most services are now online. And again, Bill may find it difficult to do it, so Rasheen would help him with online activities and engaging with services that are based online. And so again, tying in the idea that a lot of health services and appointment making is done online now. So again, I thought they were quite good examples that they were bringing in, and they justified it, explained it. So it's not on the mark scheme, but I would say it would hopefully be accepted. So that moves us on to 1C. Now, 1C takes a little shift in the context because the question here says, explain the responsibilities the care home's management has to make sure their staff are safe. So again, we're not talking about Bill. This is the manager of the care home, and generally their responsibilities to people like Rasheen, who are care assistants working in that home. So again, you kind of need to imagine yourself as a manager in a care home. So again, I suppose the main thing would be risk assessments and identifying, removing potential. Essentially, one of the responsibilities of a care manager is to do those risk assessments, to identify the hazards, and ultimately to provide a safe workspace. That's what they're meant to be doing. That's their job. So that's one thing a care manager is going to be doing, protecting the staff. We might have things like providing training and suitable equipment to perform their roles. So again, that could be something that would be key to making sure the staff are safe, that they've got the right equipment, they've got the right training to use said equipment, particularly things like lifting patients and moving them around. We might think about stuff like having a obviously hygienic environment to reduce risk of infections. So whether that is toilet facilities or food prep areas. So again, basically having suitable and clean toilets, having a kitchen that's clean to allow staff to prepare meals, to use the bathroom, and no risk of illness or infection. PPE, I'm just going to pop that there. That's a really good one. A concept that, in 2018, when this paper was kind of written, probably many people outside of the health and social care context were probably unfamiliar with the phrase PPE because it was quite a specialist kind of idea and term. COVID hit. Now everyone knows what PPE means. So again, personal protective equipment. Has it been provided? Have they got masks, gloves, aprons if they need them? So again, that's something the care manager should be doing to make sure staff are safe. CCTV could be one. We might think about national occupational standards. So has the work or the employer met the national occupational standards? Are they being provided to keep the staff safe? So I've given quite a few there. It's a 6 marker. My sort of general rule of thumb with 6 markers with my students is identify 3 and then explain them. So it's a 3 plus 3, just in the same way your 2 marker is a 1 plus 1, your 4 marker is a 2 plus 2, 2 points, 2 explanations. I will see 6 markers the same, 3 points, 3 explanations, ideally to meet the criteria. Now, if you're unsure, do 1 more, stick something else on, do 4 with an explanation, just to kind of boost up your answer if you're not confident on what you said. But let's take a look at what the examiners have highlighted. Here we go. So a nice range of answers there. So again, quite a long list. Some of what we've covered on our ideas are in here. I can see CCTV at the bottom there. Staff service ratios, lone worker policies, first aid. Oh, we should have mentioned first aid, RIDDOR, having all those policies in place. A complaints procedure is a good one as well, again, for safety. Supporting recording accidents. Oh, that is the RIDDOR procedure. Training, protective equipment, that's what we had. COSH, control of harmful substances or substances hazardous to health. So COSH training is always a good one to mention. Infection measures, updated health and safety, risk assessments, safeguarding, and health and safety policy. Obviously, one thing it doesn't mention there is data protection. I think we talk about safety of staff, and one way to maintain the safety of staff is to protect their data, protect their confidentiality, their personal information. So personal data could be included on that list as well. I thought that would be sufficient. But that last little bit at the bottom here, just to keep in mind with this question, responses must be in reference to staff. So again, if you've talked about protecting the service user, protecting Bill, you're not going to be able to pick up marks here. So again, make sure you're focusing on the professional. And again, that's why it's really important to make sure you're reading the question when you're looking at papers, or when you're looking at the answers, or when you're even doing this in January or summer, whenever you're doing this exam. Make sure you're reading the question clearly. So in this case, to make sure the staff are safe. Doesn't mention service users, and sometimes these questions can be quite confusing. So do think about making sure you've read it properly. This brings us to 1D. Now, 1D is our last question here for Bill. And the question is quite a nice one. It's one about multidisciplinary teams. I've done a video recently on multidisciplinary teams, and I actually looked at this question within that video. So advantages and disadvantages of working in partnership to manage Bill's health. So 8 marker, the key things, I'm just going to make a note of these key things with an 8 marker. So you want to stick to / reference the context throughout. In this case, it's Bill, it's the care home, it's the multidisciplinary team. Make sure you're referring back to that, and that's regularly highlighted in your answer. You may want to include pros and cons. Now, in a normal 8 marker, you might want to try and include some good things and some bad things of what's being done, even if the question doesn't always say. This question does specifically ask you for advantages and disadvantages. You're going to put the pros and the cons in there for this question. And again, I always kind of say to my students, I always see it as a 4 + 4. Try and include 4 arguments and then explain those 4 arguments. Again, that's the kind of time frame and the sort of format I tend to use, the 4 + 4. And if you're unsure, you do one more. So again, it becomes a 5 + 5. But it's your timing that you want to focus on. You don't want to spend far too much time on the question, and because you're putting 8, 9, 10 different points down to try and make sure you tick it off, when it is going to then damage your ability to do later questions. So the mark scheme, I'm going to go straight to this because, as I say, I've done this in another video. I don't want to spend too much time on this question in particular, but the mark scheme is laid out in a way that provides pros and cons. So you can see a range of services and specialists are put in there. You get things like the fact that they're sharing information effectively. It avoids wasting resources. It makes sure that information is being passed on. Bill, particularly because of his dementia, it would be beneficial for him to not have to explain his situation over and over and over again, because again, that could be difficult and tiring for him to do so. Downside of it, poor communication, different services using different systems, conflict between professionals, gaps in the service provision appearing. Even disputes over who's going to pay for care or who's paying for bits of care. So this could all be downsides of a multidisciplinary team. So let's move on to 2A, to the next set of questions. Now, scenario 2, case study sort of 2, section B, we move to learning difficulties. And again, it's always about learning disabilities, section B, and this question is no different. So we've got a care worker, or sorry, a social worker in a residential care home again. So this is a place where people stay, they live on a permanent basis to receive care. It's not medical care, it's social care. So it's maybe minor support with lifestyle, personal routines, but it's not medically centered. It is young people with mental health and they take medication. So they're not needing medical care, but they might need some assistance with taking medications. Lots of unqualified staff. There are safety concerns, and a support worker was shouting at Tara, an 18-year-old resident. Very reminiscent, almost of this of cases like Winterbourne View from 2012, I believe. Now, Tara and her parents are Jehovah's Witnesses. Tara is keen to continue education, job, loves children, wants a family, wants a relationship, and is Jehovah's Witness. So the first part of the case study is about the case worker. You've got this little extra bit added on, which I imagine will be more relevant in a later question. Now, this first question, 2A, slightly different structure to most 2-markers. You see, normally most of the 2-markers are identify or explain 2 things. So you're identifying, well, normally it's identify 2 professionals, 2 settings, 2 roles, 2 responsibilities, 2 procedures. This one is slightly different. It's name 1 organisation that could regulate this care home. So an organisation that would regulate the care home in this context. Now, regulation is, again, you're thinking about going in and inspecting, it's observations, it's checks being done, it's making sure the setting is complying with the rules and doing its job. And the NHS would be a big example of this. You know, the NHS you could consider to be someone who might set the standards and the expectations of how this care home would work. But I'm not going to go with the NHS. I'm going to go with our good old CQC. So the CQC, their job is to inspect and regulate settings, hospitals, any care location. And as such, they would do this by doing an inspection, an observation. They will look at documents, they will look at patient records, they will speak to patients, look at complaints. So the CQC is the inspector, is the regulator of care settings. So for this question, they want 2 things. And because I've asked you to name an organisation that would regulate, my expectation would be that they want you to then explain something they do to regulate the care home. Now, looking at the mark scheme, we'll just kind of see this here. There we are. So it mentions the, scroll that back up a tiny bit. So the CQC, the Care and Social Services Inspectorate, and the Regulation and Quality Improvement Authority. Now, these are lots of different services, and you'll know from studying section B in the Unit 2 topic, and I've recently released a video on this, that the UK is broken into 4 parts: Scotland, England, Wales, Northern Ireland. All of them have NHS trusts dealing with specific local issues. They also have their own different versions of inspectors and regulators who will look at medical settings. In England, we have the CQC. So although it's listed 2 different regulators, which if you are in different parts of the country, you may have studied that one. But as I'm based in England, and the main one I promote in my lessons is the CQC, because that's the one that operates within this area, or within the UK, within England. Now, what they do, you can see, observe, interview staff, interview residents, look at action plans, publish reports, follow complaints. So nice, straightforward early question, but I did like to flag this one up because it is slightly different to the format you see in papers from like 2019, 2020, 21, 22. But as I say, this is the earliest paper I could get my hands on, and so I suspect this is why it has some different formatting for some questions, because it was an early paper. So question 2B. So we're almost kind of sticking with that concerns theme. The social worker is concerned. The staff have shouted at a resident. How could he raise his concerns about his work setting? Now, again, if you had a concern within your setting, you might speak to a line manager. And again, the person who's above you, you're raising that concern. You could speak to the trust that runs the setting. It could be the NHS. It could be the CQC that he reports this to. He could use the complaints process. Whistleblow. He could go to the press or police. So if he had a major complaint and he felt danger to the patients, there's a route, or lots of different routes you can take. And again, looking at the mark scheme here, complain to his line manager and register malpractice. Whistleblow to external agencies about the care. Report to police leading to investigate. So actually, yeah, what I probably should have done is kind of say what he might complain about. But either way, you're identifying the process that they would raise a complaint, and you might talk about who they would complain to. Now, questions 2C. Explain how the care home staff are accountable to their professional bodies. Now, the professional bodies here would be your NMC, your HCPC. It might be groups like Social Work England. It could be the GMC. All these regulators of professionals. And again, this isn't the CQC. The CQC regulates and manages settings. These professional bodies manage and regulate the person. It's the same way that Ofsted will go in and look at a school, but they're not explicitly looking at the teacher. They're looking at the school as a whole. And so these professional bodies are more likely, I'm going to put the R by the Royal College of Nurses. So you've got the different bodies regulating staff, and these would be things like having policies and procedures. It will be about ensuring training and CPD has been completed. It will be line manager observations. It can be things like revalidation processes. These will be things, let's fix all these typos, but these will be ways in which staff are regulated. Are they following policies, procedures? Have they engaged in training? Have they had observations conducted by their line manager? Have they revalidated? And this would be how we would check the staff are doing their job and how the professional body holds them to account. Essentially, have you done the things we need you to do to make sure you're doing your job safely? So again, let's see what the exam board suggests. There we go. Staff regulated and monitored by bodies, training and education, ongoing CPD and revalidation, evidence that they're up to date, which kind of fits with the policy, procedures, training, standards of conduct are set. So there'll be codes of conduct they have to follow, formal procedures for concerns, complaints and safeguarding. Again, there we go. Don't accept Ofsted CQC because they manage and regulate the setting, the place. These bodies regulate the people. Okay. And the next one we have 2D. Now, 2D is a slightly different question. We are changing our focus away from the social worker to Tara. And if we just go back to the case study, just to remind ourselves what Tara wants. So it says Tara and her parents are Jehovah's Witnesses. Tara is keen to continue her education and would like to have a job. She loves children, would like her own family, and with a suitable partner and a Jehovah's Witness she wants. So you can see she wants education, a job, children, a partner, and her religion. So that's her choice. That's what she wants to do. And that says discuss what issues could come from her choices. So again, what we want to try and do in this 8 mark, and again, it's a slightly different one to other questions, but we want to identify choices and explain the risks, the issues that could come from it. So again, we had job, education, had family / children, relationship, and her religion. And you could combine a couple of those. So as part of her religion, being a Jehovah's Witness, they do not accept blood transfusions or organ transplants. If she wanted to have children, one of the risks that come from having children is that during pregnancy she could suffer quite heavy bleeding and would have her life put at risk. And then that's an issue with choice and rights, that she could put herself in greater danger if she does not want to have a blood transfusion. And you know, the blood alternative products they have don't provide enough support to help her recover during labour. So that's one risk. Obviously, her religion, one of the things to mention is that we have the Equality Act and the Human Rights Act. So under these two acts, she has the right and the freedom to religion. She also, under human rights, has the right to an education. Now, one of the issues that come from education is Tara's 18. She can't go back to school. She may not be able to go to college. So that creates issues of funding, availability of training. And that could be something that could be a problem. She could face bullying, discrimination while in her training course or in a school. Again, a further problem that could arise. The same goes for her job. Would she be qualified for any form of employment? Could she face exploitation? That could be a problem with her employment route. And lastly, relationship. So again, Tara is 18, so she's relatively young. She has learning difficulties, so that could create questions about her understanding, awareness of healthy relationships, but also the fact that this would also mean that she's a vulnerable adult, a vulnerable person. And again, there's that greater risk if she was to enter relationships of abuse, neglect, exploitation once again. So the exam board, what they suggest, what they flag up here as potential arguments. So there you go, you can see. So equally valid preference. So she has the right to choice. That's obviously one thing we want to recognise. She has the right choice, but that could conflict with other service users, other residents in the care setting. So again, they want to protect her safety and respect her wishes. Confidentiality is kind of flagged up. Her religion, education support sources, learning difficulties could affect career. But as I say, I think that item identified 4 key things, 4 key choices that Tara wanted to make. And you could easily take each one of those and just say, this is her choice, but these are the risks that come with it. And again, that would be a good way to identify. You've got 5 risks, or 5 choices in the context. If you were to take some time to explain what the choice is and why it's problematic or what the risk is, that would be I think, a sufficient answer that would meet the criteria. You could throw in a few extra concepts like the Equality Act, the Human Rights Act, so she has the right to education, the right to freedom of religion. But as I say, a nice question there. EA. We're going to move on to next. Now, this is a change in the concepts. We're entering section C, which is generally was about physical or sensory disability. So someone with a physical impairment or a mobility impairment, or someone with a hearing or sight impairment. This context is Melanie, who's 16, and it talks about how she has a hearing impairment and just how it was diagnosed. Now, again, a very long case study with Melanie. The first question is kind of our standard identify two questions, and it is about how Melanie would face issues accessing additional support. So this is a barriers question, and it is a barriers to care. Now, you only need to identify the two barriers. You don't need to go into any detail explaining. They give you quite a bit of space, but it just says identify. So as long as you identify the barrier, you have answered the question. So what barriers have we got that we can see from the case study? So Melanie's 16, so her age could be a barrier, whether she needs parental guidance, consent to seek treatment. Her hearing loss, so because she is deaf or hearing impaired, she has a barrier there. It mentions communication difficulties, that creates a barrier. The fact that she is possibly isolated, anxious, so we can maybe look at the mental health, the stigma, the concerns that should be judged, so emotional barriers. And lastly, that last little sentence talks about how she doesn't know or would like more information. Awareness barrier. Alongside this, you can throw in the standard geographical, transport, financial barriers. You could potentially look at religion and culture, even though it's not in the item, but still often is credited. And let's have a quick look at the masking to see if that is the case. So referral times, time taken, eligibility, hearing impairment, language, preferences, yep, financial, geographical, social, cultural, lack of awareness, anxiety, and lack of resources. So religion isn't there, but cultural is, so hopefully that's a kind of slight adjacent to it, but again, would be credited. 2B, so it says describe how health professionals could communicate within a team without compromising confidentiality. So despite the long wordedness of wording of the question, it's basically how can a group of professionals share information? So this is a confidentiality question. How do they protect confidentiality when working with a patient? And the answers are going to be the standard things we say all the time with confidentiality. Password protect documents, only share with who needs it, anonymize the information. Physical documents need to be locked away. So this is about how to manage her data, her personal information, and keep it safe. So what does the mark scheme suggest? There we go. Communicate with staff who only need to know about the and obviously share codes of practice, safe, secure retrieval of medical information. Mentions Data Protection Act of 1998 there. Obviously, when this question was released and published, it was before GDPR. GDPR was introduced in 2018 when this paper was, well, the same year, but this is obviously, that was in the mid part of the year. This is obviously in the beginning. So GDPR wasn't a policy at that point, so they've kind of not mentioned it, but just keep that in mind with more recent exams, the ones coming up now. GDPR has been around for a little while. They would mention that or accept that. They might still accept data protection in exams. I know it still kind of predominantly makes up the what the textbook talks about, but again, the textbook was written in 2016 before the policy came in, so there may be obviously some flexibility, but yeah, GDPR is probably the better one to go for now. But again, password protecting. So all this kind of things you would do to protect confidentiality anyway. So we're flying through these questions. So question 3C, people working in health and social care have responsibilities to prevent discriminatory practice. So what are the responsibilities? So, well, I suppose it's like any situation. Your responsibilities when it comes to preventing discrimination is if you see something, you say something. So if you see discrimination, then you report it. Obviously, use complaints and whistleblowing process, report concerns. Again, you want to engage in training, promote Melanie's rights, ensure Melanie understands rights. These would all be things you could be doing to promote anti-discriminatory practice, and that's your responsibility. So again, you report it, you see it, you challenge it. Again, you can see here, address prejudices, use written and visual communication. So again, that's how you're helping include Melanie. You're encouraging supportive treatment, you're welcoming her, you're challenging unintentional, intentional discrimination. So again, it's that you see it, you report it, you challenge it, you engage in the training so you understand what her rights are, you promote Melanie's rights, you help ensure her to understand what her rights are, and again, you complain and report any resolved issues that take place. Okay, 3D. So how do we empower Melanie and prepare her for the future? Now, the big thing about empowerment is you want to give people choice. You want to give people some control. You want to maintain independence, promote their progression and development. So if we want to empower Melanie to prepare for the future, you might let her engage in training to promote independence. So training / skills for independence or independent living. So that could be cooking / living independently. It might involve arranging support groups and social networks to support her. Training and skills for employment / education. This could even be helping her find a place to live. Arrange benefits. These will be things that you could do to help Melanie and to prepare her for the future. So what's the exam board say? So put her at the centre of provision, promote individualised care, take into account education, training, future career, treatments like and hearing aids, cochlear implants, right to dignity, support her beliefs, express her needs, specific language. So I've kind of gone more down the practical route of helping her. So I may not have picked up all the marks in this question because I've kind of stuck to the practical, but still would have picked up a few marks, hopefully at least half the marks, kind of covering the training side of her support. But accepting of a valid answer, hopefully that would allow that one to kind of be accepted and credited. And last but not least, we'll go through these final few questions relatively quickly because I say it's sort of kind of getting a little bit tired now. So again, the final section, early years focus. It's either the young or the old. It's age-related needs is the whole topic area here. The questions you can see here. The exam would like to do this in the sometimes in the final section. I think one of the most recent papers did it twice in section B and in section D, but they put you in the shoes of the worker. So you are a trainee nurse. You are at a hospital on a children's ward that's poorly equipped and understaffed. A nurse miscalculated the dose of drugs needed and gave it to a baby. And again, do you think the hospital ward will provide an effective care? So 2 essential skills you need to become a nurse. So if we're going to go down the skills route, now whether that's the people skills, you might need things like patience, empathy, communication, commitment, courage, kindness. It may also be practical skills, medical treatments, monitoring, observations. I think it's more down the personal skill, so empathy, compassion, care, sense of humour. But let's take a look at what they suggest. So it's actually quite a big range here. So compassion, empathy, caring, communication, competence, confident, adaptable, problem solving, instruction following, patience, observations. You could kind of just list any skill that any human being might need, and you probably would get the mark there. 4B. Describe 2 policies you should follow as a nurse. Well, we've kind of already seen in an early question, anti-discriminatory policy linked to the Equality Act of 2010. That would be a policy. Confidentiality would also be a policy we could look at that's popped up in an earlier question, protecting the confidentiality of staff by ensuring patient records are safe and secure. So let's see if they are on the mark scheme. Oh, okay. So examples of policy areas. They've gone down medication, codes of practice, health and safety, human resources. So equality and diversity is there. Whistleblowing and complaints. Okay. So, do not accept legislation. So I mentioned the Equality Act as part of the Equality Anti-Discriminatory Practice and Policy. Inspired by that, so whether that would be accepted as part of the explanation rather than I haven't just identified the Equality Act. But again, it's good to recognise the key policies. I always sort of see them as health and safety, whistleblowing, equality. But again, you can see here there's a few different ones on there. For C, explain 2 ways that the work of hospital can be monitored. Well, that's a nice one. Staff can be monitored by line managers. They have to go through revalidation, so professional bodies can monitor them. The CQC can monitor them. If they, well, not specifically the staff, but they will monitor the wards, the hospitals. But yeah, line manager interviews through revalidation, shadowing experiences, patient feedback, complaints procedures. So a lot of these have come up in earlier parts of this exam. Have a look here. Yeah, there we go. Service user feedback. Oh, external inspection is also allowed here, which I find odd because earlier questions said that they wouldn't accept CQC in the assessment and monitoring of professional individuals, but they do allow it here. So again, we weren't wrong to say that a minute ago. Continuous CPD or professional development, complaints procedures, whistleblowing, line managers, and CCTV. So again, stuff we've already kind of touched on, seen, or talked about in this exam so far. And lastly, discuss the possible effects of poor practice on the children and the family in the hospital setting. So this is an interesting question. So it's about the effects of poor care. So the idea that children won't recover, illnesses could get worse, children and parents are put under undue stress or strain. They're not receiving the care and compassion from hospital staff. Children become very poorly and die. So again, it's essentially all the stuff we talk about trying to avoid. So yeah, operation delays and death, health and safety issues, illness, infection, poor health, poor recovery, discrimination, high mortality. So a lot of factors linked to death and illness here, but this would be what happens when poor care isn't delivered. Okay, there we go, and that's the last question. So I know I've kind of gone through this relatively quickly, but again, it's a very old paper, and there were a few questions in here that I thought were worth flagging up because they are slightly different. As always, I hope you have found this useful. It's made a little bit of help in terms of understanding the questions, the structures, and having a look at what the mark scheme has to say. As I say, this is one of the earlier exam papers, so some of the things that the exam scheme and some of the criteria that's